Hey everyone, Andy here from Imagine Academy. Today we're going to be going over the basic scanning techniques for the Medit i700 wireless. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to do is put on our gloves. We're not going to be working with the live patient today. We're going to be demonstrating on a series of models. We recommend that if you're going to be using a laptop in the workstation in your operatory, then we always recommend you to have a keyboard cover so that's easily cleaned. Let's go ahead and start. We're going to start with the fresh scanning tip. We'll remove the protective cover. We'll place it back on our dock here. We're going to grab one of our batteries. And we're ready to go. Now, if your scanner isn't calibrated, make sure to do that first before scanning your first patient of the day. If you guys have any questions about that process, please refer back to our quick start video. Alright, so we're going to go over how to set up a single unit preparation case. We're going to be demonstrating on this quadrant model here so that you can see the proper path of the scan strategy. We're going to scan it with the patient in mind, so we're not going to be approaching the model at all angles because we have to remember that the patient's cheek and the patient's tongue will be getting in the way a lot of the time. Let's go ahead and set up the case first and we'll go ahead and get started scanning. So we'll go into the Medit link application and go into the workbox. We'll go ahead and select new case. Client name here, I'm just going to select Imagine Academy, single unit 19, and register. From there, I'm going to make sure that I have the intraoral option selected. And then I'm going to select number 19. And our restoration type, I'm going to select crown, anatomic, PMMA, and click Save. From there, I'll go ahead and click Scan. All right, while this is loading up, we'll quickly demonstrate the proper path to scan in a quadrant. So we're going to have the patient open up here. We're going to start on the occlusal table and track forward towards the anteriors. We're then going to rotate the scanner and move back towards our preparation alongside the buccal, and then we're going to rotate over the last molar and capture the lingual side of the patient's quadrant as well. And from there we'll then scan the antagonist, and then finally have the patient bite down on their back teeth. Sometimes this is going to be a little bit harder when they're completely numb. So make sure that their bite is stable, and then we're going to scan their bite in a zigzag pattern, making sure that we at least capture about 8 teeth. All right, so now that the case has been set up, we're going to make sure our scanner is on and connected, checking the service light at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. I'm going to hold the model to kind of simulate the position of the patient. We're going to have them open up, so I'm going to hold it just like this. Usually you'll be able to use your free hand to help retract the tongue or the cheek, etc. So from there, we're going to go ahead and start on the lower jaw. And the first thing that I'm going to do is we're going to scan across the occlusal table. So I don't start the scanner until I'm already in position in the mouth. So from there, I'll click the blue checkmark button. And you're going to hear the Medit song play as you scan. So once I get to the end point of my quadrant, I'm going to rotate over towards the buccal side and move back towards the prep in my last molar. Once I get towards the back molar, I'm then going to rotate over, keeping an eye on the screen as I move along, moving over towards the lingual side here, and then tracking back towards the anteriors, all in one smooth motion. Practice makes perfect. Keep practicing until you have that sequence in one smooth motion. So we're going across the occlusal table, rotating over to the buccal side, moving back, rotating over to the lingual side, and then moving forward once more time. We can see here, we can check the scan. So we got the majority of the data. I'm missing my interproximal contacts of my adjacent teeth. It's a misconception that you have to get all of your data in your first pass. Get the majority of the data so that it stitches in an accurate position, and then go back and fill in your gaps, right? So I can see here that I'm missing my contacts and bits of my prep. So what I'm going to do is I'll have the patient open back up. We're going to take our scanner. Again, we're not starting it until the scanner is in position in the mouth. I'm going to start on the occlusal table because that's where I have the majority of my data. And we're going to just start rotating the scanner, keeping an eye on the screen as well, seeing if we can capture those contact points. So here, let's try to track that mesial contact. We have the majority of that. I'm going to go ahead and stop it. Now, obviously, I would like to come in from 90 degrees, but oftentimes the patient you can't retract the cheek that far, etc. So you can have them close a little bit, and we're going to come in almost at a 45-degree angle instead. Right? And we're going to almost use the scanner to retract their cheek. Go ahead and start that back up here. And then I'm going to rotate to see if I can capture that distal contact a little bit more. Right, that looks a bit better. And we'll go make sure we have all of our preparation. Looks pretty good. I'm going to stop it. We'll put our scanner back on the dock and double check our data here. So we have all of our margins. And we have all of our contacts. So we'll be good to go with the lower jaw. Now, there are multiple ways to capture the antagonist in this situation. You can come in from the side of the patient, or we can come in from over top, right? So we can come in here, we can place the scanner in the patient's mouth, have them open up, and usually trying to capture those last molars are going to be a little bit of a challenge depending on how far the patient can open up. So we'll go ahead and we'll start here. I'm going to start the scanner. Again, we're going to just track across the occlusal table towards the anterior direction. Once I get towards that canine, I'm going to rotate a little bit to capture both the lingual and the buccal side. And then I'm going to move towards the buccal and move back towards my posterior teeth, keeping an eye on the screen, making sure that I'm capturing the data that I need to. If I'm going off track here, I'll just get right back on track, then rotate back over the occlusal table, and then over to the palatal side and move towards the anteriors again. Once we finish, we'll click the check mark and we'll double check our data. Once our preparation looks good, we'll go ahead and scan the antagonist. And we'll have the patient open up. And we can approach scanning the antagonist the same way, at least for the quadrant scanning, as we did the lower jaw. So I'm going to place my scanner into the patient's mouth in position. We're going to start on the occlusal table again. I'll click the blue check mark button here, and we'll start the scanning process. I'm going to capture my molar. We'll track forward towards the anteriors across the occlusal table. Once I get towards the anteriors, then we'll kind of start rotating in both directions, making sure we capture kind of the palatal side and the buccal side of the anterior teeth. And then I'm going to track over to my buccal side, keeping an eye on both the patient as well as my screen here. And we're going to track back and then across our last molar again to capture the lingual side of our quadrant. From there, we're going to move forward towards the anteriors. And at that point, I'm going to stop the scan and we'll double check. Usually for the antagonist scan, you don't need to go back and add any additional data. Usually that one scan strategy pass will get you all the data that you need. It looks good. And then we'll go ahead and capture the bite. All right, so from here, we're going to capture the bite. What we're going to have the patient do is open up slightly, use the scanner to retract their cheek, and then have them bite down. Remember, we're going to have to ask them to bite down hard on their back teeth. And then from there, click the start button for scanning, keeping an eye on the screen as we track in a zigzag motion all the way across till we get to the anteriors here. Once we hear that check, we know that both the upper and lower jaws have aligned to the bite scan. So from here, we can set up the case completely in Medit. You can choose to have the software leave the STLs as they are with those holes. You can choose to have the software automatically close those holes for you, or you can even have it create a 3D printable watertight model. At this point, we're just going to leave the data as is, and we can either design in Medit or we can export those STLs to Exocad. All right, so for our next case, what we're going to be doing is scanning a full mouth model for a single unit implant case. Again, while we're scanning with the intraoral scanner, we're going to keep in mind restrictions of the patient. So how far they can open up, where the cheek and tongue would be, so we can't approach the implant scan body or implant site at any angle that we wanted to. We have to use proper technique to scan it in. So we'll go ahead and we'll set the case up and we'll get started. Again, we'll set up Imagine Academy as the client name. And unlike previous cases that we've done before where we've set the cases up in ExoCAD, with the intraoral scanning workflow, we're going to set the cases up in Medit. So patient name here, this one's going to be number 14, implant. We'll go ahead and register. When we get to the prescription setup, we're going to make sure that we have the intraoral setting checked off here. And then we'll select the tooth number. So we'll select number 14, crown. This one will be anatomic. We're going to be doing it in zirconia. Select the tooth shade. And from there, that's all we'll need to do in terms of setup. So we'll go ahead and select save. After we've saved, we'll go ahead and click scan. Remember to have your scanner calibrated with a fresh scan tip ready to go. You'll always be able to check the status of your intraoral scanner with the icon at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. All right, once we hear that chime, we know we're good to go. So once the case form has been set up, we're going to make sure that we include the maxillary scan body scan for number 14 into the scan strategy. So what we're going to do is I'm going to add my maxillary scan there and click OK. We're going to first scan the patient and the gingiva without the scan body in. And to scan a full arch, I'm going to be actually standing behind the patient's head. So we're going to try to scan in this model as if we were scanning in an actual patient. So we're going to have the patient slightly open. I'm going to place the scanner into the starting implant area here, right? And we'll go ahead and we'll start the scanner like this. We'll keep an eye on the live view. You can see here that going all the way towards the distal, we'll come up towards the anteriors. I'm keeping an eye on where my scanner is, as well as where I'm tracking the data. And as we get towards the anteriors here, I'm going to start rocking the scanner so that it's picking up the additional details on the palatal and lingual side of those anteriors. Now this can get kind of tricky. Obviously you want to position your workstation in a position where you can see both where you're tracking and where you're scanning. Once we get back to the posterior teeth here, we're going to track just along the occlusal table once more time. And from there, we're going to slowly rotate in our hand towards the buccal side. We're going to track it forward, stitching together the data that we captured before. Now all of the data is coming in. We're going to slowly rotate the scanner in position and then continue tracking back towards the posterior area of our implant site where we started before. Go as far as we can, come back, then rotate over to the palatal side and then capture the palatal side here. Coming across, slowly rotating the scanner in the hand and tracking back towards the distal molars on the opposite side. Whoops. If we've lost our position, we'll come back and finish on the last molar, just like that. Now, you're going to notice some blue arrows on your screen in certain sections where the data was not captured well enough and that it's technically unreliable, which gets easily fixed by just going back and filling that data in. So I can see here, I'm not too concerned about the molar on the opposite side of my full arch, right? So I'm not gonna take the time to stitch any more data on that side. What I'm gonna really focus on is seeing if I have the interproximal contacts around my implant site. We can see here that we still need some data around that distal molar. So what I'm going to do is, again, we're going to have the patient open up, right? We're standing behind the patient. We'll go ahead and place the scanner into position. So I'm going to go right over my implant site here. I'll show it on the screen. Because we have all of that data there, the software knows exactly where to start. Have the patient open up. Position the scanner inside the patient's mouth before starting the scanning process again. And then from here, start the scan process back up. And then if we want that distal contact, we're going to angle the scan around that area. Here like this. Once we get a good angle, tilt, obviously the scanner to see if we can get it into a good position. If you lose your place, just go back to where the scanner had picked it up from before. Then maybe we try to capture it from the palatal side here. Just like this. And then if you feel like you're having a hard time getting at a certain angle, just come back, pause for a second, take a look at your data, and we can see here that we have the majority of the contact. Maybe there's a little bit of an undercut on that molar that's going to be a little bit harder to get to with the intraoral scanner. What we'll do is we'll try it at just a slightly different angle. Maybe we come from the palatal side. So again, we'll have the patient open up. We'll start further towards the anteriors this time. And then slowly just tilt. All right, once we've filled in all the gaps that we need to, we'll go ahead and we'll place the scan body into the patient's mouth. Now, remember when you're scanning something in, it's important to kind of be quick about it. You don't want to spend too much time in a certain area and stitch too much data into one place, or like inaccurately stitch your scans together. So practice makes perfect. Get the whole arch or all the area that you need first, and then go back in and fill any gaps fairly quickly. So from here, what we're going to do is when we place the scan body into the patient's mouth, depending on what scan body you use, there's always going to be a timing indicator on that scan body. Try your best to position that scan body or the timing indicator on the scan body either on the buccal or lingual positions so that the adjacent teeth do not get in the way, right? Because the most important thing on any scan body is going to be the depth indicator, usually at the top at the scan body, and the timing indicator on the sides. So we'll go ahead and we'll just screw that in. And just to note, this is a lab scan body. You'll be using intraoral scan bodies for an actual patient, which will be shorter, which will be easier to screw in. I position the scan body here. We'll click the scan body step. I'm going to start behind the patient. We're going to slowly track around the scan body, making sure we capture it on all sides. And I'm going in a more zigzag motion here. And then I'm going to rock the intraoral scanner back and forth, and then we'll make sure that we capture the distal portion there. And then we'll click the check mark. Again, double check that you have all the data that you need for the scan body. In this case, we do have complete scans of both timing indicators on the lingual and buccal side, and the majority of the scan body itself. So once we have both the upper jaw scan as well as the upper jaw scan body, we'll go ahead and we'll scan in our opposing. Instead of coming from behind the patient this time, we'll go ahead and we'll start from the front. And again, we're going to start on the occlusal table. So at this point, we're going to slowly track towards the anteriors. Once we get towards those interior incisal edges, we're going to rock the scanner back and forth to grab the majority of those anterior teeth. Again, I'm keeping an eye on where my scanner position is as well as my data. Once I get to the other side, I'm going to slowly just track back along that occlusal table. And from here, we're going to slightly rotate towards the buccal, track back towards our anterior teeth, rotate the scanner in the hand, track it back towards the buccal surfaces of our initial position. And then if we want to get the lingual side, we're going to rotate over and track along the lingual side. From here, we'll finish on the opposite side of the arch. So, we're going to double check our data. Usually for your antagonist scans, you don't have to go back and add additional scans. This looks good. We'll go ahead and we will scan in the bite. When we have the patient bite down, we're going to ask them to bite down on their back teeth, right? Because oftentimes it's going to be hard for the patient to find their bite when they're completely numb. We'll have them open slightly, actually, place the scanner against their cheek, and then have them bite down. Once they've bitten down, we'll start the bite tracking. Again, just go in that zigzag motion from the posterior teeth towards the anteriors. Once it's matched, we'll go ahead and we'll stop. So we can see here that if we want to check the opposite side of the occlusion, there's a second option at the bottom of the screen that says second occlusion. So we'll go ahead and we'll check that. We'll scan the opposite side. Now usually for a single unit, you don't necessarily need to do that, but when we scan in full arches, it's always good to make sure that we don't have a canted occlusion. So once we have that kind of set, again, the patient's going to bite down. And from here, we're going to just track in that zigzag direction, at least 8 teeth. It almost automatically matched our data for us because it's already been aligned on the other side. At this point, our data is just going to optimize and we'll be ready to go. Once our jaws have been aligned, we can again choose how we want the software to process our data. Do we want to close the holes? Do we want to create watertight models? Or do we want to just leave it as is? Usually, if I'm going to be designing in Medit or in ExoCAD, I'll close the holes at a later time, so I'm going to leave the data as is. Once your scans have been completed, we're ready to export them. Whether you're exporting them and keeping them in-house and designing in Medit, or you're exporting out to ExoCAD or a third party to design your cases for you, what we could do is go right to the case file in your workbox. Under File Viewer, you can double check which STLs you're sending out, and then in the top right-hand corner of the screen, there is an export feature for you. You can export them directly to the computer or your server or anywhere else. To demonstrate the basic scanning principles and fundamentals, we're going to be using our patient model. Before we get started, we're going to set the case up. Here, we have it set as just an upper and lower arch scan, and the dental restoration is going to be a night guard. Once we have the scanning software started, we'll go ahead and lay the patient back. So, there are 3 ways that we recommend scanning a patient in. You can approach from the side and scan directly from the front. It's important to try to keep the scanning elbow at 90 degrees to avoid fatigue and scanning inaccuracies. The second method is to scan in from a 45-degree angle. This is going to be my preferred method. In all of the approaches, you'll be able to use your free hand to retract the cheek. The third method is approaching the patient completely from behind. Again, you're going to have to choose the best method that's the most comfortable for you. I'm going to have the patient open up here. We're going to start with the maxilla scan. Before starting the scan, I'm going to make sure that I have my initial position first. So we have the patient open up. I'm using my free hand to retract the cheek. You can use an instrument to do the retraction, but you want to make sure that it's not reflective and it interferes with the scanner's accuracy. I do want to mention that Medit has a smart scan filter where you can have the software automatically filter out any obstruction in the gingiva just to capture teeth structure. But we're going to start with the basic filtering first, and then we can go from there. All right, I'm just going to make sure I have all of my molars here, and then we're going to slowly work towards the anteriors in a straight line. Once we get to the canine, I'm going to rotate my free hand and retract the lips. And to capture the anteriors, we're going to go in a zigzag motion while rocking the scanner to capture more of the buccal and palatal side. And then once we get to the posterior teeth on the other side, we will then again go straight back, right? I'm still using my other hand as my source of retraction. Once I get to the end, I'm going to rotate my scanner at 45 degrees to capture the buccal surfaces. Again, rotating my free hand to retract the lips, but at this angle, the scanner is going to be doing the majority of the retraction here. So at this point, we'll rotate the scanner in our hand. To capture more of the labial surfaces. Again, using my free hand to retract the cheek. Once I get to my last molar, we're going to slowly rotate over the molar. To capture the palatal side, we're going to rotate our scanner at 45 degrees and slowly track back and gather the palatal data. Once I finish, I'll click the check mark. Now that we've captured the majority of the scan, we can check on our screen here to see where and where isn't the reliable data. Any areas marked with the blue arrows will let us know that we have to go back and fill them in. Now when I take a look at my scans, I can see the areas where I need to go back and fill in any additional data. So let's go ahead and do that. I can see here that I need to pick up a little bit more on the posterior side. So again, I'm going to start at my initial starting point. We'll start our scanner and we'll slowly rotate in that direction until those blue arrows disappear. If you know you're going to be designing a specific restoration, you don't need to go in and fill in every single spot. That is unreliable. But since we're going to be designing our night guard, we want to make sure that we capture the majority of the teeth structures. So let's go back in here and capture the incisal edges of our anteriors. So we'll go ahead and we'll start on a premolar. And then slowly work our way more towards our centrals. Until those arrows start disappearing for us. Now that we've scanned in our maxilla, we're ready to move on to the opposing. I'm going to click the mandible here. Now, usually for me, when I'm scanning in a full arch maxilla, I like to approach at a 45-degree angle, but this time I'm going to reposition the patient and we're going to scan the mandible directly from the front. Again, using our free hand to retract the cheek, not starting the scanner until we're in our initial position, and then we'll go ahead and we'll start. Again, I'm going to come straight across the occlusal table until we get towards those anteriors. We're going to go more so in a zigzag motion until we get to the other side, then straight back along the occlusal table. Once we get to the end, we're going to rotate our scanner 45 degrees to capture the buccal side. Once we get to those anteriors, rotate the scanner in your hand. And then continue tracking back towards the molars until we get to our initial position. We're going to then rotate over to the lingual side. Again, angulating our scanner at 45-degree angle. And capturing the lingual side. Again, we'll move back towards the posteriors. And from here, click the check mark. Just like our upper arch, we're going to double check the data on our lower. Again, if we notice some areas that need a little bit more attention, we'll go ahead and address those. For this one, it looks like our premolars and some of our molars need a little bit more data. So we'll go ahead. I'm going to start on the occlusal table first. That's because that's where we have the most unique features, and the software is going to be able to automatically detect that a little bit easier. So from here, and then slowly rotate and scan until those blue arrows start disappearing for us. We're going to do that same process for any areas that we need additional data, and then once we're good to go, we'll go ahead and scan the bite. The last thing we're going to be doing to scan in a full mouth will be capturing the bite. Now, usually if you were scanning in the quadrant, you're only going to be scanning the bite on one side, but whenever we're dealing with the full arch, full mouth, I should say, you want to be able to capture the bite from both sides. So we'll start on the patient's left side and then continue over to the right. I'll go ahead and have the patient be open first, just so that it's easier for me to get the scanner in position against their cheek. I'm applying a little bit of pressure to retract the cheek with the scanner here, and then at this point, I'm going to have them close down. This is what we found to be the easiest way to get the scanner into a proper position. If you try to get the scanner in position with them already closed, you might be applying too much pressure to their cheek. So once we have them bite down, oftentimes if they're numb, they're going to have a hard time finding their bite. So just remind them to bite down on their posterior teeth. We want to make sure that we capture the bite where it's stable. And we're going to track forward in a vertical motion in a zigzag pattern. Once we hear that check mark, we know that the scan, or both scans, have a line to the bite. It's a general rule that you want to capture 6 to 8 teeth on both sides. That bite looks good. I'm going to click the second occlusion option to capture the bite on the other side. Have the patient open up, position the scanner, retract the cheek with the scanner here lightly, have the patient close down, bite down on their back teeth. We want to capture where the bite is stable. And again, I've already gotten the check mark here, but I just want to be safe and capture again at least 6 teeth. That looks good. I'll click the check mark. This way we can ensure the bite is accurate on both sides and it's not canted anywhere. Once your scans are checked and everything's been aligned, your STLs will be ready to be designed either directly in Medit or exported out to exocad. That's going to cover all the basic techniques with scanning with the Medit i700W. If you have any further questions or would like to go over anything in further detail, please reach out to us at Imagine USA.